Frank Herbert. The novel of Dune Messiah was published in 1969. The story takes place 12 years after the beginning of Paul Muad'Dib, Atreides' rule as emperor. By accepting the role of Messiah to the Fremen, Paul has unleashed a jihad which conquered most of the known universe. Paul is the most powerful emperor ever known, but is powerless to stop the lethal excesses of the religious juggernaut he has created. Although 61 billion people have perished, Paul's prescient visions indicate that this is far from the worst possible outcome for humanity. Motivated by this knowledge, Paul hopes to set humanity on a course that will not inevitably lead to stagnation and destruction, while at the same time acting as ruler of the empire and focal point of the Fremen religion. The Bene Gesserit Spacing Guild and Tleilaxu conspire to dethrone Paul, and the guild navigator Edric is able to use his own prescience to shield the plot from Paul's prescient visions. The Bene Gesserit Reverend Mother Mohiam has enlisted Paul's wife, the Princess Irulan, daughter of the deposed Padishah Emperor Shaddam IV. Paul has refused to father a child with Irulan, but he and his Fremen concubine Chani have also failed to produce an heir, causing tension within his monarchy. Desperate both to secure her place in the Atreides dynasty and to preserve the Atreides bloodline for the Bene Gesserit breeding program, Irulan has secretly been giving contraceptives to Chani. Paul is aware of this fact, but has foreseen that the birth of his heir will bring Chani's death and does not want to lose her. Edric gives Paul a gift he cannot resist, a Tleilaxu-grown Gola of the deceased Duncan Idaho, Paul's childhood teacher and friend, now called Hate. The conspirators hope the presence of Hate will undermine Paul's ability to rule, by forcing Paul to question himself and the empire he has created. Furthermore, Paul's acceptance of the gift weakens his support among the Fremen, who see the Tleilaxu and their tools as unclean. Chani, taking matters into her own hands, switches to a traditional Fremen fertility diet, preventing Irulan from being able to tamper with her food, and soon becomes pregnant. However, Chani's extended exposure to Irulan's contraceptive has weakened her, and endangers the pregnancy. Othame, one of Paul's former Fedaykin death commandos, reveals evidence of a Fremen conspiracy against Paul. Othame gives Paul his dwarf Tleilaxu servant Bijaz, who, like a recording machine, can remember faces, names, and details. Paul accepts reluctantly, seeing the strands of a Tleilaxu plot. As Paul's soldiers attack the conspirators, others set off an atomic weapon called a stone burner, purchased from the Tleilaxu, that destroys the area and blinds Paul. By tradition, all blind freemen exile themselves in the desert, but Paul shocks the freemen and entrenches his godhood by proving he can still see, even without eyes. His oracular powers have become so developed that he can foresee in his mind everything that happens, so by moving through his life in lockstep with his visions, he can see even the slightest details of the world around him. Bijaz, actually an agent of the Tleilaxu, uses a specific humming intonation to implant a command that will compel Hate to attempt to kill Paul under certain circumstances. Chani dies in childbirth, and Paul's reaction to her death triggers Hate, who attempts to kill Paul. Hate's Gola body reacts against its own programming, and Duncan's full consciousness is recovered, simultaneously making him independent of Tleilaxu control. Chani gives birth to twins, who come into the world fully conscious with Kwisatz Haderach-like access to ancestral memories. The son is a total surprise for Paul, who had only foreseen the birth of their daughter. Sitali offers to revive Chani as a Gola, but Paul refuses to submit, considering the possibility that the Tleilaxu might program Chani in some diabolical way. The face dancer then threatens the infants with a knife to force Paul to accept, and also demands all of his charm holdings in return. By successfully escaping the oracular trap and setting the universe on a new path, Paul has been rendered completely blind, yet he is able to kill Sitali with an accurately aimed dagger due to a psychic vision from his son's perspective. Later that evening, Bijaz approaches Paul and repeats Sitali's offer, but is killed by Duncan on Paul's order. Now prophetically and physically blind, Paul chooses to embrace the Fremen tradition of a blind man walking alone into the desert, winning the fealty of the Fremen for his children, who will inherit his empire. Paul leaves his sister Aliyah, now romantically involved with Duncan, as regent for the twins, whom he has named Leto and Ganima. Aliyah orders the execution of Edric, Mohiam, and others involved in the plot against her brother, going against his wish that none of them should be hurt. Alia spares the Princess Irulan, who in grief for Paul has renounced her loyalty to the Bene Gesserit and vowed to dedicate her life as a teacher to Paul's children. Duncan notes the irony that Paul and Chani's deaths have enabled them to triumph against their enemies. The Spacing Guild and the Bene Tleilax have been discredited. Irulan's defection from the Bene Gesserit removes the Sisterhood's last lever against the Atreides, and Paul has escaped deification by walking into the desert as a man, while guaranteeing Fremen's support for the Atreides line.